English were still on the boats crossing the North Sea, clutching their axes. The Irish brought wisdom and learning to the early English generations. People like Bede, who wrote the History of the English-speaking Church, praised and honoured the contributions of Ireland, which were centred around Columba's work in Scotland. You see, Scotland and Ireland are the same country. Scotland is a Latin term for Ireland, Scotia. The greatest philosopher of those days, John Scotus Erigena, he was from Ireland, but he was a Scot. Another great philosopher, Michael Scott, was actually from Scotland. He became the philosopher at the court of the great Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II down in Sicily, translated Aristotle from Arabic into Latin, and was a polymathic genius. And then we have Duns Scotus, again from Scotland, but he's actually, is he Irish, is he Scot? He's a Scot. Ends up in Paris and becomes one of the greatest philosophers of medieval Europe. So this Scotic element of European intellectual history is simply not known about. I find it scandalous that the schools in England, where I've taught for 10 years happily, there's nothing in the curriculum about Ireland. It's as if it doesn't exist. They never learn about the Irish famine. They don't learn about the background to the time of troubles in the 60s in Ireland. And there's no respect for the Irish culture and poetry and the Gaelic language, which was producing epic, extraordinary verse and poetry before the English ever set foot on the islands of Britain. The Bronze Age poetry of the ancient Gaelic tradition of Ireland is as old as Homer, and is the oldest poetic tradition that survived in Europe. As a bard and as a druid, I reverence the ancient Gaelic poetic teachings and the stories of Emergin, the first bard who stepped on the shores of Ireland, a descendant of Phineas Farsaid, the founder of the Irish Druid schools. Now, none of this is mentioned. The English have simply not a clue about the depth and wisdom of Irish culture, and this is a tragedy that needs redressing. There are many things that we need to do in British society. We need much more knowledge about each other's precious history and heritage. The English need to learn about the Irish and the Scots and the Welsh, the Cornish. They should all learn and sit at the feet of each other's sages. The educational curriculum needs to emphasise more strongly morality, ethics, philosophy, joined up thinking in the way that I'm trying to do in my talk. I'm a religious studies teacher, but you get one lesson a week. It's not enough to explain all this to young minds. And you need, so I would say, at least as much philosophy and ethics per week as mathematics. Mathematics is great, but it's overestimated, because all the really important things in life, like love, truth, justice, etc., cannot be measured. Hobbes tried, great mathematician, taught Charles II, invented modern political science. You can't measure justice. You can't measure the incalculable consequences of injustice. But you can have a sort of gut instinct. You can do a calculus on it. And I can assure you, my dear friends, that if Brexit is pushed down the throat of the Scots and the Irish and the Welsh and English, mayhem is going to erupt in the British Isles. And I've done a calculus on this, and it's going to be incalculable in the effect, because that will be an injustice. And it's a showing of lack of political wisdom, lack of flexibility. So I hope that I've honoured the memory of St. Thomas in this very short address to you. Thank you, St. Thomas, for all your work. He was the greatest disciple, I think, apart from Mary Magdalene among the women. I salute her. And we founded a Mary Magdalene Studies Association here in France. I honour deeply Mary Magdalene. But among the men, I think Thomas was the wisest. He wasn't the most powerful. He wasn't the most, politically, advantageous. He didn't go to Rome and do a Peter. So there's never been a Pope Thomas. He was sent off to India. But India is the land of sages and mystics. I know some of them. I've known many wonderful illuminated yogis and spiritual teachers in India from all traditions. That's the company that Thomas kept and still does to this day. And that's the tradition that Britain really should be upholding. Thomas à Becket is our, most important saint from the Middle Ages, and we have to bring that wisdom, that holistic thinking, that what I call transpersonal wisdom, to bear on these political problems. I mean, in their own way, the Russian thinker Dugin and the American thinker Steve Bannon, both who are deeply interested in esoteric thought, both who have studied, Gnostic traditions and so on. But what they've done is they've misapplied, very dangerously, solutions based on nationalism and exceptionalism. What Dugin is saying in Russia is that Russia is the forgotten great power of history. It has to be, the empire of the future. Eurasia is the thing to be, according to Dugin. And of course, like all philosophers, there's some truth in that. But then where he's wrong is then he attacks the West. He says, oh, the European Union is corrupt, we hate it, America's corrupt, Britain's corrupt. Only the great Orthodox soul of Russia is God's favourite people. And, so he argues about massacring Ukrainians for wanting to be Orthodox but also European. For him that's a heresy, and he becomes quite violent if you say, well, actually, I quite like Ukrainians. Aren't they some kind of Europeans? No, for Dugin, no, burn them all. And that's the problem that comes to even advanced thinkers that then can't reach for the heart, can't reach for peace as the primary responsibility of the savant. Yeah, and that was the true Christian orthodoxy. The word means going straight to truth. The authentic orthodoxy is to go straight to the heart, to go straight to truth. And that's what I'm trying to express from. Thomas was the most orthodox of all the disciples because he went straight to the truth. He said, look, come on, Jesus, is this really you? Show me. That is the scientist in action, which is going straight to truth. And then Steve Bannon, again, a tragic figure, Irish, he should know better. He should listen to his Druid elders. He's causing mayhem by being far too clever in the wrong place at the wrong time. Bigging up Trump so that he can do his buffoonery of rhetorical destruction of normality, I would say. And, if Trump manages to pull the troops out of Syria, if he manages to steamroller back the US Army, as he's now promising, then I'm going to take my hat off. He can also build, whilst he's on it, the top floor of the Pentagon and make a Department of Peace. He's such a maverick, he might just like the idea of putting a nonagon up there. But, so, it's just possible Trump will turn up trumps for peace. But I suspend judgment. It's looking more likely that he will be co-opted by the forces of militarism and war. As has Bannon been. He has some knowledge, he has some esoteric wisdom, but unfortunately it's been translated into a kind of rhetoric of exceptionalism. America is the one great country, the hope of freedom. Russia is the kingdom of evil and darkness. Europe is the kingdom of evil and darkness, particularly the European Union. Therefore, Brexit is a moral duty to support, and it turns out his Data Analytica actually paid for, funded, did the research to push Brexit down the throats of an indecided British public. Bannon's fanaticism was a clinching factor. And I'm always suspicious of these kind of people. They haven't done their heart work, is what I can say, because by fanatically dismissing X or Y as evil, you ratchet up the rhetoric and you get violence. And these Bannons and Dugans, they're petty demagogues of philosophy. They're not true philosophers because they're coming from a place of hate and fear. And of course, you can always whip up a following and get thousands of followers because unfortunately, a lot of people looking for an explanation of reality the way it is, find the fear explanation. Let's blame somebody. Let's blame the Jews. That was the thing in the 20s and 30s that led to Hitlerism. Let's blame the capitalists. That was the Marxist or communist tradition. Let's blame the communists. That was the Cold Warriors view. Let's blame Europe and liberalism. That's the kind of modern Islamic, jihadi kind of point of view. Let's blame the Jews. They also think that one. The Jews think, well, let's blame Islam. Let's blame... everybody's coming from a place of hate. Whereas I would say, actually, the European Union is coming from a place of love. It's an integrative project. It needs work on it. But fundamentally, Mr. Bannon has said, I will drive a stake through the heart of Europe in Brussels. Poor man is demented. You don't drive a stake through a heart. You love it. Europe deserves to be loved. It's got some great... it does some wonderful thing, and not just the European Union, but all the countries of Europe, all 27 countries, each in their own way. I've just been to Slovenia. It's a beautiful little country. Ljubljana is a perfect little jewel of a city, living in harmony and peace with other European nations. We don't want to drive a stake through the heart of Europe, Mr. Bannon. We want to bring love to circulate freely through all the parts of Europe, including the UK, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, the whole of it, north and south. We want it to continue to flourish as one being, as St. Paul said. We are interconnected, brothers and sisters of one risen Christ, one divine logos, to use Neoplatonic terminology. And we also want to extend that love to our Russian and our American friends and allies. So I would like to see a renewal of the 1990 Treaty of Paris. I think Macron is an intelligent enough politician to realise the importance of peace. We need to re-sign the 1990 Treaty of Paris, which brought an end to the Cold War. We need Russia and America to stop this rhetorical war of words, and both of them to stop attacking the European Union and Europe. Europe should, with the wise leadership of both Germany, Britain, Italy and France and all the other countries of Europe, we should be putting peace policy at the heart of our policy. I've argued for a European Union mediation service many times in print, and I would like to see that actualised. So stop sticking your stakes into hearts, Mr. Bannon and Mr. Dugan. Do some quiet meditation on what I've said, if one of your disciples shows you this talk, and reflect on St. Thomas and his work on this day, 21st of December, and how we can make peace our priority as a planet. We don't want a new Cold War. We don't want Brexit, which would lead to utter chaos and the dismantling of the UK state, which I don't think would be achieved peacefully. It wasn't built peacefully. I don't think it would be achieved dismantling it peacefully. And certainly there'd be enormous legal battles and costs involved. Far better is to choose peace now. Make that our priority. And go back and read your fundamental texts of European philosophy. Reread Thomas Hobbes. Reread the Gospels. Read the Gospel of Thomas, which I've done a commentary on. I've done a commentary on all the 6 Gospels. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, but also Thomas and Mary Magdalene. They're available on my Green University website, which I strongly recommend to listeners. And also you'll find on my Patreon channel some other talks where I go into even more esoteric detail about my own work and the philosophical work I'm trying to do on the planet at the moment and why. So I do recommend people to tune into that. And otherwise, thank you so much for listening, and I hope that St. Thomas's Day, 21st of December, has been a good one for you, and that the Druids of Europe and Britain can report there is peace. The final thing I want to say is really we have to look at things. The reason I appreciate the Druid tradition and work within it as well as the Christian is we have to learn to think as the planet as a whole. We have to learn to think as Gaia, the Earth Mother. In the Greek philosophical tradition, Gaia, the Earth Mother, is the sentient being of the planet. And actually we are that, all of us. In the Egyptian Hermetic mysteries, Earth was thought of as a divine being, Geb, who's the earth god, who's the husband of Nut, who's the sky goddess. It's not a question of which gender, the earth is both male and female. The earth is a god and a goddess energy. So are we, little godlets, as Sir George Trevelyan used to put it. But we little godlets have to think now in terms of the well-being of the whole earth goddess as a whole, and think think green, think ecologically, which is why I set up the Global Green University. It's the first and only of its kind. It's a research-only university, and you can only work through independent study, but we find you a tutor, we give you backup, and we support your research, which has to be as rigorous as the University of Oxford or London or whatever. And there's some good people doing some work in that university. And there's a great website which you can register for, and then you can listen to my commentaries on the 6 Gospels in detail. But, you know, not everybody chooses the path of the academic. But for those of you that are interested in deeper studies, I recommend it to you. And with that, dear friends, I'm going to say adieu and bonne chance.